Hey, Coach, how are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited to have you on my show today. Not to only talk about your mindset as a basketball coach for women's varsity, but really just understand your story and your journey that's taken you up to this point. And also learn a little about what it feels like to have the #1 program in the country. So I'm really excited to have you on my show.
Well, thank you, Grant, for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's get this show started like I always do. I always start the show off with my favorite question, which is, what does mentally tough mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question. For us, we define it as mental toughness is the ability to focus through fatigue. And oftentimes coaches will say, hey, it's, playing through, you're feeling physically beat up, or, my leg hurts. And we don't think that's being mentally tough. We think mentally tough is focusing through fatigue, being able to take the task at hand and really make that be the focal point. There are voices that we hear when we're fatigued, and oftentimes they become louder the more tired someone gets, and it takes them off their beaten path. And to be able to have the presence of mind to hone in at that task, whatever that next important thing is, that's a definition of mental toughness for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when you're going through fatigue and you do have those voices, that's the moment where you don't listen to them, you actually talk to them so they don't control you.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So when you think about mental toughness, the athletes that you've coached, and I know there's a lot of them that you've coached, what comes up for you, or who are a few of the athletes you've coached that are examples of being mentally tough?
Wow. I've been blessed to coach a number of incredible athletes. I think early in my career, one athlete that stands out is Carrie Walsh, who is an Olympian beach volleyball player. Carrie had an incredible ability to focus on the task at hand and bring in just an incredible mindset, competitive mindset rather. And her mental toughness was off the charts. Danielle Robinson was another one that comes to mind. She's currently playing for the Minnesota Lynx in the WNBA.
Awesome.
Another player with an incredible motor and competitive spirit, and would be able to block out any kind of external voices or distractions and be able to hone in at the task at hand. Those are two incredibly gifted but mentally tough players.
Awesome. Yeah, you can definitely see it in Carrie, for sure. So when we think about, we're going to get into your mindset. So how would you describe your philosophy as a coach, or your mindset as a coach?
Well, I think as a coach, you try to continue to evolve. Evolve personally, professionally, and also with the times. I heard an interesting perspective on the effectiveness of a coach, and that is the more irrelevant we become, then the more effective we are as a coach. It's a pretty cool concept that if on game day our players can rely on themselves and each other and not need us to help them with the in-game management adjustments, then we've done a fantastic job training them in practice.
Right.
So in terms of my philosophy, sure, I value teaching and teaching life lessons through the game of basketball. But fundamentally, my philosophy involves empowerment and making sure that our student athletes are well equipped to be productive members of society after basketball is said and done.
That's beautiful. I love it. And I've coached as well, and there's nothing like it when you come to practice and they've already started practice for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And for me, it's not only that's a great feeling, and they're bought in. They're bought into the structure, the culture. So it's a beautiful thing when that happens.
Yeah, I would say this year's team had an incredible culture in terms of their work ethic, the way they played the game, and if you could just if you didn't see anything but you listened, you would hear the laughter and the trash talking and
right.
The communication on defense and offense and the teaching on the sidelines to each other. It was an amazing atmosphere amongst these group of young women. It was a sisterhood, competitive, but a healthy competitive environment. And I think that is a telling tale when you can listen, and what you hear is probably speaks more to your culture than what you see.
Yeah, I agree. And I definitely want to talk a little bit more about the culture as well. But before I get into that, this is kind of a two-part question. How are you at practice as a coach, and how are you on game day?
I think I bring a lot more intensity in practice. I think it's important that we can expose them to a level of chaos so that we can teach them to be comfortable with chaos. Adversity is another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
It relates to chaos. So we will do things like play with an underinflated basketball, or maybe swallow the whistle as an official,
Right.
to get them to deal with some of these added chaotic aspects of the game. And we're very demanding and intense, and we are striving for perfection. On game day, we try to be more of a fan. We try to be more of someone who helps them manage the game. You can't be uber critical on game day. There's
Right.
just too much stress involved in being able to perform at their best, and the parents and friends are there, and so you really do have to switch gears with your kids. You
Yeah.
almost need to be two different people
Big time.
from practice and game day.
Big time. You know, it's interesting. You and I have talked before in the past, and I love it how you put situations for your players, the unexpected. You know, putting them in a position where they are developing problem-solving skills. And not too long ago, I had Lisa Willis on my show, which is a former WNBA player who played for the Sparks and a few other teams, and was incredible at UCLA. But she runs a bunch of camps, and we were talking about development, how we develop kids in this society or in this day and age. And I shared with her about what you do, about giving the team a flat ball. So what do you do with it, right? So she's like, I'm going to use that.
Cool.
So that's great. So let's talk about culture a little bit. We know that even though there is a culture that exists here at Mitty, but the culture changes from year to year depending on the players, the dynamics. How do you get these players to buy into the culture, and how would you describe the culture here?
Well, I think your culture has to be centered around your non-negotiables. So there are some non-negotiables in our program, and that's punctuality, that's respect, that's discipline. Then we have like standards on the court, like giving up offensive rebounds are non-negotiables. Whereas, turning the basketball over or missing a shot, those aren't necessarily non-negotiables for us. So that doesn't necessarily impact someone's playing time.
Got it.
Not hustling back on defense, that's a non-negotiable. And as you start talking about these things that center around our standards and expectations, that starts to mold your culture.
Yeah.
So that gives us our working culture. In terms of our behavioral culture, we want humor, we want intensity,
Yeah.
we want peer evaluation and feedback. I'm constantly struggling with the lack of social skills with our kids as they're coming up, and it's something that I try to advocate for, or champion rather, in the classroom with my students, to make them communicate in person, to give and receive feedback, not texting it to each other, right?
Exactly.
So we work a lot on communication, and we go through great lengths. Phones are not allowed on buses. They have to put their phones away. Phones are not allowed on team meals. When we go on overnight trips, we take the phones. And that's not a control thing. It's to have them play games and do the things we did growing up, which allowed us to understand the social cues and to be able to mature as young adults.
Yeah.
Because in their first job interview, they're not going to be able to text questions.
Right.
Or, I mean, it's nuts, but
it's true.
that's what we have to try to help them do. And what better way than to be able to do that in a game that they love to play, with people they love to play with, a very safe and supportive environment where they get to develop these communication skills.
Right, exactly. How would you coin your culture as far as, would it be a communication culture, a working culture?
Wow, I like to think of it like spokes on a wheel. So at the center of that is, love of sport, love of that game. And then there's got to be a bunch of spokes that help support that endeavor. So that has to be, personal development. That's got to be part of our culture. the ability that you're coachable. So our
Right.
definition of coachability is being able to take the immediate corrective measure and implement it. It's not having a good attitude and working hard. That's the price of admission at the door.
Right, exactly.
You're not here if you don't do
Right.
that. So, there's all these different spokes that I think build into our culture, and it would be unfair to the kids and to our program to say it's one or two words, because it's too multidimensional.
Right.
What makes this group so special and what makes this program so special.
Right. And I think that's cool. It's, obviously there are cultures out there that they coin their culture something, right? The earn it culture, the feel it culture. But the beautiful thing is that you understand my culture is so robust.
Yeah.
It's special. It's hard for me to actually I would have to do a sentence or maybe three or four words. So that's awesome. Well, let's switch to probably your most exciting season this past year. I'm sure there's a lot to talk about, for sure. But what was it like when you found out that you were the number one program in the country? And what was it like when you woke up the next morning?
Well, you kind of knew, and after we won the Tournament of Champions in Arizona in December, we beat the number 1 team, the number 2 team, and the number 3 team in 4 days.
Wow.
Back-to-back days.
Yeah.
Open up against Millennium, and then we play St. John's and St. Mary's and Riverdale from Tennessee. So to win that tournament, you knew, because we were ranked 4th or 5th at that time in the country, and ranking is just a projection of
Right.
what people think you are in terms of how good you are.
Right.
But the reality is it's the journey that matters. And what I'm most proud of is the sounds you hear in our gym. There's lots of joy and laughter. And there's also intensity and demands from each other. And ownership when someone makes a mistake. I mean, we're really seeing some amazing life lessons. And I'm proud of the development of these young women.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. So while that number 1 next to our name, and it also ended up at the end of the season, we were dubbed national champions by ESPNW and USA Today. That's an incredible accomplishment, but more affirmation of the way that we play, or the brand of basketball that we've played. But quite frankly, I'm most proud of the culture and the group of young women that we have.
Right. I love it. And what do you think makes the team, the 2017 team, in 2018, what made them so special?
Well, I don't think you can ignore the level of talent. I mean, you can't be number 1 in the country without a certain level of talent.
Right.
So I think you've got talent, you've got depth. You start talking about Haley Jones, arguably the number 1 player in the class of 2019. Charisma Ortiz graduated going to Penn State. I mean, she was just invited, one of 35 players, to the U18 national team trials for USA Basketball. And then Haley was invited to the U17 national team trials. Wow. So you're talking about 2 of the top players in the country, and then you still have your handful of Division I players.
Right.
And that's not to minimize any of our other players. It's just for you to understand that talent is such an important piece. But not only are they talented, they're unselfish. So over half of our baskets were assisted. And the way that we could win basketball games was also with our defense. And then you take kids like Haley and Charisma, who can play multiple positions, which then allows us to diversify the way that we play and who's in the game and the combinations and what positions or things they can do on the floor, or spots we can put them on the floor to be effective. It was a really fun team to watch. Their brand of basketball was exciting, unselfish. We have a little bit of pizzazz, and yet we're still fundamentally sound.
Right.
So, there's a lot that made that team special.
And if you don't mind sharing this story, because
Sure.
you shared this with me before, but when we talk about this past team being so special, there was a moment, and I believe it might have been, I don't know if it was the playoffs or it was the state game, but typically teams before a big game, they're in a locker room and everyone's all quiet and everyone's all intense. Share with me that moment, what this team did.
So let me rewind it a little bit. So in our last game, our senior game, our center, Nicole Blakes, had a kind of a freak ACL injury. So she tore her ACL in our final league game on blocking a shot like she does or did a gazillion times for us. And then with her athleticism was saving it, and the top of her foot grazed the floor. She tried to react to save it, and she tore her ACL. And I may say that's our first ACL in 7 years,
Wow.
which is a great statistic, although one is one too many. We've gone through great lengths to guard against that in terms of the ACL prevention, et cetera. So I give a shout out to Coach Nichols, who's our performance coach in the weight room and off-season conditioning. Anyhow, so Nicole, we have this injury, and obviously everyone just is so bummed for Nicole. Set aside how that impacts us as a team, more about the personal devastation for Nicole is what we were all kind of feeling. So it was a difficult week, a really difficult week. And we then have our first playoff game. So I roll into the locker room, and Nicole's in there by herself, which I thought was odd. And I said, Nick, where's the team? And she's like, Coach, I don't know. And I was like, well, can you find out? So next thing I know, she knocks on the locker. And she's like, is anybody in there? I mean, I'm talking like a locker, like, because we're in a locker room.
Yeah, big lockers. Right?
Yeah, supposedly. I didn't realize it at the time. So then next thing I know, she knocks on it, and all of a sudden the kids come piling out like the Muppets. They're like crumpled up, and they're piling out and dying laughing.
Right.
Because they were hiding in the lockers.
Right.
Again, this is the nature of this group. They like to sing every pregame. When I walk in the locker room, they have their set of songs that they karaoke. Yeah. And you got to roll with it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes some teams, want to meditate. This team wanted to laugh and, cut jokes and hide in lockers. And karaoke. What are you going to do?
Be joyful, right?
Be joyful.
That's great.
It is.
Well, I know this is going to be a kind of a hard question, but when you think of this team, how would you describe them from are they mentally tough? Are they resilient? Are they gritty? Like, how would you categorize them?
Gosh, I don't know how to describe it in one word. They were the very best at flipping a switch. So they're cutting jokes, and the next thing I know is, all right, guys, we gotta focus on our shell defense here, our on-ball defense. So we're gonna get into blah blah. And next thing I know, the eyes hone in, their body language has changed. They're in an athletic stance. They're ready to roll. So we call it flipping a switch.
Right.
So this group could go from these pockets of joy to this incredible competitive intensity in a matter, like a split second.
Wow.
It was amazing. It was super cool.
I love that when athletes and teams can just flip a switch, like you said, but get locked in.
Oh, they locked in a matter of seconds.
Wow.
Collectively.
Right.
So,
Wow.
that was fun.
That's awesome. Now, again, you and I have talked about this. Obviously, I've coached as well. I've had incredible seasons, not like yours, but where you're so invested as a coach, emotionally, physically, mentally. You're invested in this team and the relationships. And when the journey's over and you walk away from it, at least my experience, I was a little empty. I was a little empty on, well, what do I do next Monday? Where's my players, and where's those relationships? Where's that communication? Where's that stimulation? And so I had to deal with that in my own way to let it go. With all these years that you coached, and especially this past season, how do you let go each season as a coach?
So I think, you talked about an important word, which is relationships. So building a relationship with your players, both on and off the court, is huge. And being an on-campus coach, I get to see them on my way to 7th period. I get to pop into the weight room during their 8th period strength and conditioning class. So I make it a point to check in with them periodically throughout the year, so that when that season is over, there is still that connection, there still is that communication. And don't get me wrong, I was really bummed to not be able to go to practice on Monday.
Right.
To hear all those noises collectively, all that joy and teaching and empowerment and feedback, peer evaluation, so many positive things going on, to affirm that we did things right in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's still room for improvement, things we could do differently, But there is a bit of an emptiness with that. The fact that I coach club helps. So I coach club, and we've already started doing club, and the majority of our kids do play within the same club program, our program, even though they might play with other clubs, which I think is good too. I still get to coach them in the off season.
It's great.
Which is great. But yeah, I don't think you can ever really fill the void of what it feels like at the finality of a season.
Right.
But if you can continue to invest throughout the year in those relationships and realize that basketball is what brings you together, but the relationships go well beyond this season you had. I had the fortune of going to the Final Four, and the WBCA presented me with the National Coach of the Year.
Wow.
And I had 10 former players join me for that festive affair. And it was amazing to be able to be with these women who are now have their own kids and
Wow.
talk about those set of experiences and to affirm that it is about relationships.
Right. Exactly. What makes you a good coach?
I don't know that I think I'm good. I think I'm successful, and I think I work hard. Certainly the numbers might argue that I'm good, but I think the minute you think you're good is the minute you're not good.
Right.
I mean, I think you still have to have a little bit of an edge that I need to be better. So maybe that's a better way of saying it. Because I realize that I have had my share of success and that I can coach successfully.
Yeah.
But I think you have to have that continued growth mindset that I still can be better and I should be better and I want to be better.
Exactly.
So I think that's important.
It's awesome. No, I agree. Now, with the success of your program, as a coach, how do you coach the hype? Meaning, as you guys are going throughout, even last year when you guys are beating the second team, the first, the second, and third team, so they're gaining this confidence, but there could be all this hype outside of their confidence. There could be, news reporters and social media. How do you coach that for them to focus on the right things and not get caught up in the hype?
That's a really good point. I think it's important to realize you're never as good as people say you are, you're never as bad as people say you are. And so when we talk a lot about after games, it's something along these lines we always say, hey, if you had a great game, awesome, build on it. But if you didn't play as well as you would like, that's okay too, because there's still tomorrow. And so we try to stay somewhere in the middle of all of that and really do focus on us and our journey as a team and getting better in different facets of the game and enjoying our time together.
Right.
And so the hype really just becomes a bunch of white noise and becomes irrelevant to our process.
Got it.
That's how we look at it.
Awesome. Well, I know there's Nick Saban, who's the head coach for University of Alabama. He has a 24-hour rule. So whether if you won or lost, you have 24 hours to deal with it, celebrate it, do whatever you need, and then you have to let it go. So that's how he kind of manages the hype of winning. And also losing too. And I think the next question is, because that you've experienced a lot of success here, I'm sure there's not a lot of losses. Now, I know there's from time to time, but how do you coach that? How do you coach when someone's so used to winning and then they lose?
I think losing is as important as winning, because the way that people handle winning and handle losing should almost be the same. It's still a growth mindset.
Right.
And we have to remember that it is about the way that we approach playing the game and competing and being great teammates and bringing joy to the way that we play and honoring the game of basketball. So when you talk about all those things, winning and losing is really a byproduct of how you conduct your business. And oftentimes you can't control the scoreboard.
I agree.
It almost just becomes a product of things that you did on the floor. And so we don't get too high or too low over the wins and the losses.
Got it. Focus on the process, trust the process, and then the numbers and the wins will come.
Yeah, I mean, it is easier said than done.
Right.
I mean, it's
Right.
a lot of those cliches. But truly, if you can lead your team with those set of behaviors and that you really are focusing on the process and the things that you say to your team are consistent with wins and losses,
Right.
then they can digest those wins and losses a little bit better as well.
Got it. So you've been coaching it for 26 years. Do you ever feel the pressure to uphold the winning standard?
I think pressure is an interesting word. I don't really know what that is. Meaning, I get up every day and I want to be my best. I want to be the best math teacher I can be. I want to be the best friend that I could be to a colleague. And I want to be the best coach I can be. And where the chips fall, they may. And because of our level of work ethic and the amount of talent we get and incredible coaching staff and the amount of time we put in, we are going to experience more than our share of success. But our end game is not to be national champions. That happened to be part of the process, and it was an affirmation and a tremendous reward. But that isn't necessarily our end game every day. So,
Right.
so this pressure that you talk about, yeah, I'm just trying to be the best I can be.
Awesome. That's great. Well, when we think about pressure, sometimes pressure turns into fear.
Good point.
And I think what's really important now in today's sporting world, there's a lot of coaches and programs, whether if they're conscious of it or not, they have this fear-based coaching approach.
The stick versus the carrot.
Right. You know, and so I understand in some sports people do that. You know, and being in my role and even coaching football, like, how do I take a fearful mind and make it fearless? But how do you, what's your take on fear-based approach and within coaching?
Well, I think you bring up a really big point about this idea of fear or anxiety or nerves. Sometimes they kind of bleed into each other. So oftentimes before a big game, I'll ask the kids, I said, do you feel butterflies? Or are they more like pterodactyls? You know, and they kind of laugh. And I said, guys, that's a great thing. That means you care. That means you care about the outcome. But quite frankly, guys, we can't necessarily control the outcome. We can control our effort and the kinds of things we're doing on the floor.
Yeah.
But take those nerves and, number one, acknowledge it. And number two, run with it. You know, you're going to have a little more adrenaline. You're going to jump a little bit higher. You're going to be a little bit faster.
Yeah.
And if you don't like that feeling, go really hard in pregame and get tired. That will help, minimize those physical effects. We also try to guard against this outcome-based evaluation. So, for example, if a kid is struggling with their shot, oftentimes it's mental. There's some mechanical things we can talk about, but we talk about looking at the 10 shots that they took in the game and ask themselves, not if they made them, but did they execute the shot with great fundamentals? Did they execute the shot within the flow of the offense? Was it within their wheelhouse?
Yeah.
You look at, were they 10 for 10 in that criteria? Then they were perfect from the floor.
Right.
That's how we look at it. And I think oftentimes you can help kids with that fear of failure mentality or just the fear of the big moment by simply focusing on what we've done all along, which is the skill or the mechanics or the corrective measure. And it all feeds into each other.
It does. It's, in a way, it's kind of like baseball. You can go 0-4, do everything right, and go 0-4. And so what do we focus on? Are we focusing on trying to get a hit? Well, that's out of your control, because if we control getting hit, everyone would be batting that
Solid
up.
contact.
Just make contact.
Hitting the pitch that you want to hit.
Exactly.
Taking the pitcher deep in the count. There's so many good things you can talk about.
Exactly.
If you're 0 for 4, there's still some positives.
Yeah, exactly. So your 600 win, what was that like?
I felt really old. Well, no, I mean, you stop and go, whoa, that means I coached a lot of games. I've been doing this a long time.
Wow.
And, while I wake up every morning and feel old, I think sometimes when you're coaching, you lose yourself in the moment and the set of experiences. In all seriousness, I am grateful to Archbishop Mitty, to my former players, my current players, former coaches, current coaches. None of that is possible without them.
Right.
I mean, let's keep it real.
I agree.
So a lot of things just go through your head, and you take a step back and it's kind of like, wow, I can't believe I'm here right now. Like that many years in with that amount of wins, and you become very nostalgic. You look back at those fun players to coach, those incredible seasons and losses that were the most, tough to
Yeah.
pill to swallow, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
You look back at those things.
Well, what about when you achieve 700 wins or even 1,000 wins? Is that in your vision at all, or in your mindset, or is it?
With a walker, are you talking about?
No.
Well, I don't know if it's in the near future, but yeah, I mean, I think it's funny you say those milestone numbers, but really, I just want to win our next one.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's kind of how you get to 600, is you're just worrying about winning the next one without that being the focal point of the process. But it is about, you can't look at the milestone numbers. You got to look at the process, and then one day you wake up and you're like, gosh, we've had our share of wins.
Right.
And that's kind of how we approach it.
Yeah. And the process that you've actually implemented in this program has produced.
Yes.
That's just a reflection of the number, which is awesome.
It's a byproduct.
Yeah, exactly. So since you've been here for 26 years, does it make it more special, the fact that you're alumni and you've been here for 26 years?
Yeah, I think being a product of the Archbishop Mitty community generates maybe a greater sense of pride for me. The other night I was watching the Warriors play, and I was there with a former player, a current player, and then her daughters, and it was like 4 generations of Monarchs.
Wow.
And to be able to celebrate a game that we all love and cheer for a team we love, and it's kind of what sport's about, is bringing people together in relationships and bringing joy to our lives, and we get to be a fan.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, yes, being an alum and a faculty member here, there's just so much pride and community, a sense of community here that helps us feel really good about what we're doing.
Good. One coach that I coach with, when you were talking about having 4 generations of Monarchs together hanging out, he was telling me, he's like, when I have football players that are actually in weddings together, or someone's a best man, he's like, I've won. Like, for me, that I've created this culture, but these relationships for these kids to really love each other throughout life beyond the sport.
Yeah, they talk about a sisterhood. Our gals talk about a sisterhood and being there for each other.
Yeah.
Not just on the basketball court, but outside in the classrooms or in life. They now have created friends that they can lean on to support each other and to go through life with.
Right, exactly. Well, obviously you've had this successful career. Have you ever thought about the next level, college, Olympics?
Well, I coached the national team, which was an incredible experience.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
Yeah, we won a world championship and the FIBA Americas, and seeing some of these young women at that time, now they're, Asia Dore at Louisville and Katie Lou Samuelson at UConn. Those guys, Enrique Ambugale at Notre Dame, who, as you know, hit the game winner in the Final Four this year. Having those women on our team and working with them was such an incredible experience. And I did coach at the college level for less than a year. It was awesome. I was at Cal as a recruiting coordinator. Loved working with the elite athlete, loved game day preparation, scouts. There's so much about it I loved. I really wasn't a fan of recruiting. You're kind of paying homage to an 18-year-old to put bread on your table. So for me, being a math teacher is what pays my mortgage.
Right.
And
exactly.
that's a really nice perspective for me, and a work-life balance that allows me to be have my hands in teaching and then also basketball, but I'm not eating or sleeping one of those things.
Right.
And I think as a college coach, your life revolves around recruiting, and you need to be available at the drop of a hat to talk to a recruit or call a recruit. And geez, I don't know, I just don't want to do that.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I
No.
mean, it's just not my cup of tea.
Got it. Well, when you coached the under-17, the Olympic team, obviously, I can only imagine the team you had was just incredible, the team you were just talking about. But what was it like winning gold?
Well, winning a world championship was amazing because it's like in the world.
Right.
Best in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also know we barely beat Spain. right? Like the game could have went either way. So there was a tremendous amount of gratitude to be able to be standing on the podium, getting the gold, but also recognizing, it could have been the silver, but it wasn't.
Right.
It was the gold.
Yeah.
So we had a tremendous amount of gratitude, and we were happy to be world champs. But I also remember the time we spent seeing the Eiffel Tower. We had a friendly tournament in Paris, and to walk the streets of Prague. So while, I hang on to that gold medal and that experience of being a world champion, I also really hold near and dear to my heart those experiences we had off the court, of being able to travel the world because of basketball.
Yeah.
That's a really cool and special experience.
That's great. As a coach, what keeps you up at night?
Feeling like I should have done things differently.
Really? In what regard?
Substitution patterns. Maybe I didn't see that a kid was struggling in class, and now in retrospect, I realize that's what it was, and so then they brought it onto the court, and I just thought they weren't going hard when the reality was they had something else on their mind. So the things that bug me most is what I should have done differently. And I'm learning to be better about that, to acknowledge what should have been done differently, what's the corrective measure, and then move on. It's kind of hypocritical that I expect that of my players, and I need to be better of that as well, is, address it, deal with it, and move on.
Right.
Because the losing sleep over your next opponent, we now have a process, right? I watch film, study them. We have our system in place. This is how we are going to attack them. Here is our set of strengths. So that's all very systematic.
Right.
Those kinds of things, I don't lose sleep over. But if that didn't go well, then I'll look back and say, okay. And so we've really tweaked our system in a way that has allowed us to win a lot of basketball games, because we do a lot of that stuff right.
Right.
Where we as a staff worry most is in player development and our management of our staff and our players.
Right.
That's where I and we as a staff want to be better, and that's in large part why I went back to school to get my master's in performance psychology, is to be better, a better communicator, and to be better at understanding how people are hardwired differently.
Right.
And how everyone's motivated differently, and how we as coaches have to tweak things to best meet the needs of those student athletes.
I love it that you went back to school and got your master's in performance psychology. How much do you implement mental performance skills, sports psychology? How much do you implement that within your program?
I think all the time. When you think about, we talk about outcome-based coaching versus process-based coaching.
Right.
So, if you don't have a clue about performance psychology, you are the one that's saying, you were 2 of 10. What are you doing?
Right.
The way that we approach the 10 shot attempts is right in the wheelhouse of performance psychology.
Right.
We bring up a Venn diagram about turnovers, and we say turnovers is not necessarily the worst thing that you can do. And we talk about the scenarios and when they are good. When you're making an aggressive play, sometimes you're going to turn the ball over. We want to push the envelope. We have to be willing to take the risk to be successful on the court, and to also empower these women.
Right.
They have to take risks, and by taking risks, sometimes you're going to skin your knee.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's part of the process, and having setbacks on the floor is okay.
Right.
So the way that we approach our coaching and our management of players is all centered around performance psych. I don't think you can be successful or create an atmosphere that is joyful, and that is embracing of all walks of life and all different kinds of hardwiring without some knowledge or application of performance psych.
Right. Do you think, we all know, and this is a general statement, we all know how important the mental game is. But not all programs, not all high schools, even college, and even there's some professional teams, they've not bought into it yet. Do you think, at least at the high school level, do you think that mental performance, sports psychology, it's been integrated? It's something that is probably more used now and more accepted, or do you think there's still a ways to go?
I think because of the internet and things like your podcast and
Yeah.
social media, there has been so much literature out there now about ways in which they can do mental imagery, or kids can look at performance restoration in different ways. And that when we look at someone's confidence, it's fluid, right?
Yeah.
It's not always like, well, I got to 10, so I'm never going to be a 9.
Right.
It drops to a 6 sometimes, and some days it's an 8, and other days it's a 10. And so you have to understand that that's going to fluctuate, and that's okay. That's part of the journey of being an athlete. So I do still think we need room for improvement, in that our coaches need to be educated, and their resources have to be more available for them to know what to do and how to help, and then maybe bring in other people to support them in that mental game endeavor.
Yeah, I agree. One more question before we wrap up here.
Sure.
So when you think about your career, you've produced 21 league championships, 20 CCS championships, 12 NorCal championships, and 6 state championships. Wow, that's awesome.
Thank you.
What drives you for the next season? When you have all of that success behind, what drives you into the next season?
You know, if you walked in our gym and you see our kids, you would go, gosh, they go hard. And what drives me is they deserve my best. Like, I see the amount of commitment and effort and drive that they have. I owe it to them to be my best. So what drives me is to be my best, because I owe it to the people who are giving it to me. And so there's this beautiful reciprocation for the people that we work with. And that's what we say when kids are kind of like, hey, I don't know if I want to play next year. I was like, hey, you shouldn't. I mean, you know,
Right.
and I was like, look, you know, we work too hard, and our staff is too committed, and you know your teammates are going to want you to be
Right.
committed. So if you don't want to be here, that's okay. We still love you, right? You can still, you know, work on a different endeavor. But, I mean, that's the bottom line, right? Is
Right.
we want to be equally committed. And that's, you know, the beauty of it, because there's this incredible drive that's reciprocated from the kids as well as the coaches, and that's why we continue to just move up and beyond and forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it.
Thank you.
Well, I love talking with you,
Likewise, Grant.
and
Thank you.
I really thank you for your energy and sharing your journey and your mindset, being a coach at this level. But, you know, with my years of being an athlete, my years of working with coaches and athletes and teams on the mental game, and being exposed to a plethora of coaches, you truly are one of the special ones, and it's the
thank you.
reason why that your program is the way it is, because you, I think you cover all aspects of being a great coach.
Well, geez, Grant, that's quite a compliment. Thank you very much. And hopefully, you know, 5 years from now, we're better than we are, and myself included. That's a goal and objective, is to be better tomorrow.
Awesome.
Thank you, Grant.
You bet.